Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to day 4 of our focus week. And really excited this afternoon to talk to you about a topic which is quite close to my heart, and I'm sure to a lot of you today as well listening to us. And that is that true collaboration starts with trust. And to talk about that and have that conversation, I'm really pleased to speak to Susan Ni Chriodian, who some of you may have seen at the P2P Transformation Summit back in June. And Susan's got a wealth of experience in finance organizations, leading those finance organizations globally, and now is involved or hosts a fantastic podcast called Life Beyond the Numbers. So, Susan, I'm sure you can explain to people better than I can all everything that you've been doing. But do you want to just give an introduction to everybody, please?
Of course. Thank you, Ellen. And it's lovely to be here again with the P2P group. I love it. So what was I going to say? Working with people in organizations to try and bring about change, to try and embrace the human side of work, which I think is what we're going to talk a bit today about as well. But that's where I spend my time, is how can we have dignity at work? How can we respect one another? And then how can we collaborate in a way that allows us to innovate and do all these amazing things? And often we try and shortcut some of that, and I'm sure we'll come to it later. And sometimes it's just easier than we think, because it's about being in relation to people. So I went from loving my numbers career and being in numbers to loving a career with people and beyond the numbers, which is the name of my business. And that's where the podcast title comes from. It's a bit about life beyond those numbers.
and I'm sure everyone listening today will certainly agree with that. When it comes down to it, it is actually all about the people within our industry, within our departments, and building on those relationships. And I was talking a little bit earlier on in the week on our Innovation Day about how I believe that a lot of the innovation that we have in our business, or are able to have in our business, comes from that collaboration piece. But I also think that there's a stage that comes before that. And for me, that stage is trust. I mean, would you agree with that?
It's an interesting one, because I think it might be a chicken and egg scenario. Because if you join a new team, you're right in the door. Are you going to trust everybody on the team? Are you going to take time to build up that trust? Are people going to trust you? And kind of the only way you're going to know is by collaborating, by getting stuck into something together. Okay, I might say, look, I trust you, Ellen. I'll do whatever you want me to do. But maybe that will get me burnt as well in the process somehow. So maybe I have to find my feet and get to know people. And I do that, I think, by seeing who's there when I need help. Or if I ask a question, is somebody willing to help me understand better or to work with me? And that's all about, I suppose, relationships, but it's also collaboration, isn't it? Because we're not really going to get anything done at work without being able to rely on other people.
No, absolutely. And I think that it's just, it actually stifles any kind of innovation if we actually just are working just by ourselves in our own area, just doing, I don't know, a certain amount of just purely siloed work. And I know that we probably all have worked with people who do work a little bit in that way. And sometimes it's a bit more tricky to sort of crack that nut and see what's inside. But what happens, do you think, in a department where there just isn't that element of trust?
Oh, so it isn't good. I think most people will relate to having worked somewhere in their lives where they didn't either trust their colleague or their line manager or a direct report or whatever. And I think when that trust is gone, you feel like you're being undermined. I think that's one thing. And you're maybe second guessing yourself, and then you become defensive about what you're trying to do. And that can cause all sorts of conflict and consternation. And conflict is fine. There's no problem with conflict as long as it's dealt with properly. But actually, if there's no trust, you're probably not going to be able to ask for help. You probably feel afraid to ask for help. You may not ever really want to admit you've made a mistake. So you might try and cover something up. And of course, if you're working in accounting, it's going to come out eventually. So it's much better to kind of be upfront, I think, about what's going on. And there'll be blame. You'll be happily throwing your colleague under the bus when they're not around. You'll be saying, well, you know, Ellen's not here today and she didn't do what she was supposed to do last week. And, you know, you'll kind of throw away the focus from you and blame somebody else. Whereas if there's trust amongst people, they go, well, actually, Ellen isn't here, but I've picked it up because we needed to get it done. And you know what? It was my responsibility in the first place anyway. And I think it's just about, it's honesty makes such a difference, doesn't it?
And I think feeling that support, like you're saying, within the team, and ability to be able to share those kind of emotions as well, and actually put your hand up and say when things are wrong. But what do you think that can be done if you're working in an organization to change that? I mean, maybe it's hard to change that when you're in an organization, but perhaps if you're leading that team and you feel you've got that almost like a toxic atmosphere, what do you think you can do to help to change that?
Well, I think there's quite a few things you can do. I think you need to spend time with people, and you need, like, especially if you're the leader or the team leader, it's about actually getting to what's really going on. And often it's hidden under the surface, you know. So the first answer somebody might give you when you say, well, what's in your way here, may not be the correct answer. And you might have to dig a little bit deeper. I think that requires listening, but also holding back judgment, because maybe you can hear the blame story going on in the background, but if you're gentle and you probe enough, you'll probably get to the root cause. Now, if it looks like that's not going to happen, there are other ways of doing it. And, you know, that Amy Edmondson is the person who writes about this psychological safety, which you know, is an element of trust, of course. There are other elements as well, but psychological safety, you can do an anonymous survey with your team. There's 7 questions that she sets out, and you can find them if you Google them. 7 questions. It's a kind of like, if I make a mistake, will my team members hold it against me? And if you're getting anonymous responses, you'll get an idea of where the group is at, and you'll know where to start. And I did this exercise with a team, and we did it on a poll. So there was transparency, because I think transparency is a huge part of trust. So we had it on a screen behind, and we asked the questions, and people were seeing the answers in real time.
Yeah.
And the finance director was fine with that. And actually, it helped him see he had a bigger problem than he thought he had in his team. And then it was up to him to go, right, well, what am I going to do here to solve this problem? But everyone knew he was trying to do it, and he was being open about how to tackle it. And I think that's a huge part of regaining trust.
Absolutely. That sounds like a really good idea and a good exercise for people to do within their teams. So I think if anyone's listening and is maybe working in a team where they feel like they aren't able to express themselves, perhaps that's an idea to put forward, or an idea to run yourself if you're leading that team. Because I think you're right, Susan, you know, you need to have that kind of transparency, don't you? And you also need to feel that the person who is running that team or department, or you know, going up to the exec level, they're on your side, whether that's from a perspective of, you know, you've done something that wasn't quite right, or something's happened and it didn't work, but feel able to say, do you know what, that's okay, because we've learned something from it.
Absolutely.
And sometimes I think if you're looking at collaboration, I mean, going back to that conversation we had just now about fear, sometimes I think that the collaboration is held back a little bit by perhaps ego or pride, and being protective of your area and what you do within that department. If we notice that in ourselves, or perhaps within the team. Is there anything that we can do to try and prevent that or overcome that within ourselves if we notice it?
Noticing is a huge part, first of all. I mean, I always think like we're often blind to things ourselves. We don't see our blind spots like that. So if you begin to notice, actually, it looks like people aren't speaking up around me, or, there's a series of mistakes being made here, and I don't understand why it's not coming to me, why people aren't alerting us or whatever, then you can start to go, well, has it got something to do with me? Am I the common denominator here? And that might start you to ask those questions. And the other thing I think is you can also think, well, what are the reasons why people aren't coming forward? Almost take yourself out of it, but think like, if I was looking at somebody else or advising somebody else, what would I think that they might think? You know what I mean? And you can brainstorm a couple of different ideas and go, oh, but I think when you're a leader, I always think offering yourself up is the first thing to do, by either saying, I don't know to something, or by giving an example, telling a story, because we respond to stories more than anything else. So you wrap a story around a time that something went wrong and it was your fault, and this is how it got dealt with. And that allows somebody to come forward, even if they go to a colleague or whatever, and you just open it up and show you're approachable.
Yeah, no, that's another really good tip for people to have, because like you say, sometimes we just, it's very easy to look outwards, isn't it? And I think we're probably programmed and trained throughout our lives, everyday lives and business lives, to just look outwards and to look at our team. But it's much, much harder to look at ourselves. So perhaps, like you say, treat yourself as a third person and think about how you might respond.
And that's the other thing about that, Ellen, as well, is that we actually, we're programmed. If I make a mistake during the day at work, I'll say, oh, it's because I was tired. I didn't sleep very well last night. Or, I don't know, somebody kept me awake, whatever. But if you make a mistake, the same mistake on the same day, I go, oh God, Ellen, it just never seems to do anything right. I don't know what it is about her.
It's wrong with me.
So we look favorably upon ourselves.
Yes.
And we allow ourselves those excuses, but we tend to judge others more harshly. And I think it's about going, okay, what else could go on here? And actually, it's looking at the behavior is telling us something. Behavior is always communicating something. So Ellen making a mistake is not Ellen deliberately setting out to make a mistake. At least we hope not. It's because there's something going on that actually I owe Ellen the courtesy of asking her, what's going on here? Is there something going on?
And maybe, yes, like taking a step back. And I think that probably the events of the last couple of years have made us, I think, perhaps a little bit better at that. I don't know if you'd agree, but post, pandemic, or before the pandemic, I think perhaps that people were less likely to look at how the home life of the team member might influence how they behave. Because I was just talking to somebody earlier on this week, actually, and she was just saying that even through a later stage of the pandemic, she was still very much aware of somebody within the team. The performance was not quite as good as it had been going back a year, and certain sort of interventions had taken place, and it turned out that person was actually in a shared house and constantly working from their bedroom, was very reluctant to put the camera on, and when she did, it was always with a filter behind, and never took it off, and was very reluctant to share that information because of what it might say about the situation. So I think that perhaps, I don't know if you'd agree, that over the last couple of years, we're starting to be a little bit more aware of how people's lives can impact the productivity at work, much more so.
I think we are, and I don't know where we lost it, really, when you think about it, because honestly, we have so many facets in our life, And work is just one of those facets. So it's not like we turn ourselves off everything else when we go into work, and we're not robots. We are people who come with all of this stuff going on. And yeah, we try and put on a brave face, or we put our personal life aside because we want to get on and do good work. But actually, everything that goes on in our lives impacts us. And, we tend to think of an organization as a unit, a system, with boundaries and everything. But actually, when you think about it, everyone that's coming into the organization day in, day out is being influenced by something else that's going on, either in their family life, their community, politics, COVID, climate change. I mean, we could go on and on and on. And there are so many things that we take in, and we bring that with us wherever we go. And that's reality. That is reality. And it's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And trying to be aware of that. I mean, perhaps sometimes we're so focused on the work that we're doing, that we have to do, and the deadlines that we have and the objectives that we have, that it's quite difficult to be always aware of everything else that's going on and how people might be impacted. I mean, even just on a even though we're not doing it as often as we used to do, but even on a commute, how that can impact people, and how differently they come into work, but with that all on top of everything as well. So no, absolutely, I think that's right. And it's funny you're saying, where did we lose that? Yeah, I don't know. I mean, what do you think? I mean,
I think professional got this rap that it needed to be, stone-faced, grey-suited, kind of austere, whatever, that there was no room for emotion. But I spent a lot of time looking at kind of emotions and feelings and things like that as well. And what's really interesting is, up until the 1980s, psychologists dismissed emotions as noise.
Right.
So if you think of, a lot of us, our generation, would have gone to university in that kind of era of actually you have to leave that stuff outside the door. You cannot bring it into the workplace. But really, wouldn't you? I know I would rather work for somebody that I trust, because they see me as a human and I can see their humanity. And as people, we have this approach, avoid. That's our automatic kind of, can I approach this person? And the first thing is, do I trust them?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, there's something I was reading the other day, because I have a terrible memory for names. And I was looking at something the other day, and it was saying, well, that's an evolutionary there's an evolutionary reason for that, because in the past it was much more important to remember someone's face and what they were saying, and learn whether you trust them. Are they from here? Do you recognize them? More important than it was to just remember their name. So there's that that reason as well. So it's so important that we actually do learn to trust anyone and build on that to have an ongoing relationship with them, whether that's obviously in business or in our personal lives.
But one of the really awful things about that, I think, from a human perspective, is when we need people, often we're sending off avoid signals. Because we're in defensive mode, or because we're trying to cover something up, or whatever, or because we're stressed. And so people are staying away from us. And actually, that's again back to that behavior, Ellen. That's when you need to dig a bit deeper and go, well, I'm going to go into the lion's den, even though it says avoid, or the person's sending those signals, and just ask. Or you ask somebody in HR to do it, or a colleague to do it, whatever. But don't let people who you think are not behaving as they normally would feel
don't just leave them. No, that's very true. I mean, like you're saying, there could be a multitude of reasons why, and I think that in itself is something to focus on as well, isn't it? Really understanding why something is going on, why in the team that had previously worked well, why is that not happening anymore? And I think that asking that question a lot of the times actually is really important in terms of building that collaboration piece, building trust and building innovation as well. A lot of those, from my perspective, goes back to, well, why are you doing it anyway? It's
Yeah,
good to
where's the
ask that.
meaning for you? Yeah.
But I think it's important. We can't always trust everybody all the time, can we? And I think sometimes it's a question of trying to find that balance, or can you think where that balance actually should lie as well? Because we're thinking, or we were talking yesterday about fraud within P2P. And I think that an excess of trust can sometimes lead to errors and risk. So where in our departments do you think we should find that balance?
Yeah, that's an interesting one, because I think when it comes to, I think we have to set out saying we trust people. I really do, because I think we respond to being trusted as well. So if you've kind of got and that's not being about being naive either.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the other way of looking at it is, especially the leadership team or the finance team, is you're safeguarding the assets of the organization. So you're protecting the organization from something going wrong. And that's the way I look at trying to combat fraud. It isn't really about we don't trust you. It's about, it's my job to ensure that the assets that are entrusted to me are protected from anything happening. And oftentimes, the funny thing about it is you might need collusion, which is collaboration, for fraud. So people will find each other. And I think when people want to commit fraud, they will find a way as well. And it's quite difficult. You know, people get fooled all the time, but it's really sad to not trust people.
I know it's something that we talk about a fair amount on PPN, because people take advantage of that human element of wanting to trust people, particularly when you've worked with that person for any number of years, which tends to be the case. You know, you were talking about where fraud does happen. It normally happens in environments where that person's worked there for upwards of sort of 4 years or so. And then that can be really harmful, can't it? I mean, I think it can be really harmful for the rest of the team as well.
Absolutely. But I just think, Ellen, when it comes to it, if you don't have controls in place to protect, because that's what it's doing, it's protecting that environment. And, you know, I like in my auditing days or working overseas, whatever, over the years, the amount of teams I've gone into where people share passwords. And to me, that's like, you're asking for trouble. Because what's to stop somebody going, well, the finance director shared their passwords with me, so I suppose it's all right for me now to share it with you. And you're the temp who came in and you're like, woohoo, payday. You know, because you see opportunity. And I think that's where controls, if controls are in place, proper controls, they are protecting. The control environment should stand up and protect the assets so that trust is allowed. It's enabled.
Yeah, and so I suppose it's leading by example, or not necessarily just the person in charge of that department leading, but everybody then within it doing what they should be doing, so that we can then have that element of trust and allow that to take place.
And when you find fraud, it is usually, it might not just be relationships or over a longer term, it's that there's been a lax in controls as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's interesting what you're saying about collusion as well, because yeah, that certainly happens a lot there. But when if you've got those controls in place, and maybe things like segregation of duty, then you're not necessarily going to, or you shouldn't then be so vulnerable to fraud. Exactly. I think if we want to embed that environment within our teams, sometimes, particularly when you're talking about collaboration, I think sometimes there's an element of change management that has to go along with that. With particularly if you're talking about joining the different teams together in some way, particularly between finance, procurement, treasury, for example, accounts payable. And I know a lot of organizations are starting to do that a lot more, particularly some that we've been talking to just recently. and yet it still seems to be that change management element falls by the wayside even still, and it becomes something which is almost an afterthought. So people are shown a process or being told something that they should be doing, expected to get on with it, and perhaps given a PDF on an email attachment and say, there we are, everything's changed. Why do you think that's still something which people don't take enough time and care and attention over?
It's a funny one, because I think one of the things is we all think, a lot of us think at least, that everybody's like us. So we think, if I'm going to do that, then everybody else is going to do it because it makes sense. Because in my head, it makes perfect sense. And my flow diagram with that new process or the memo I wrote or whatever is as clear as could be. There is no question. But of course, that isn't the case. We're all individuals. Some of us read through the lines. Some of us don't read anything. Some of us like to see a process chart. Some of us need to be walked through it. Some of us need to be invited to respond and question it. And I think none of us want to be told what to do. I know I certainly don't. And I couldn't even follow a recipe for years, Ellen, because I hated being told what to do. But of course,
I'm saying nothing.
But I think it's like, we have to remember, you hear a lot about diversity and inclusion. It gets a lot of press. And I kind of think for me, it's often about diversity of thought.
Yes.
Inclusion in processes and inclusion in change. And for everything that's changing, people are losing something. And I don't think we think like that. So yes, okay, this is a new improved process. But, Mary or Tom have done something a certain way for 10 years. And they're very good at it. Mightn't be very good or efficient, but they've been doing it a certain way, and now you're telling them to do it this way. And they've lost something. And that's why you get all of these parallel spreadsheets being kept by people and covert operations and because they don't want to let go. And I think it's almost like that's the part of the change management that we underestimate the impact of it. We really underestimate the impact of it, because we see the benefit to the organization of moving ahead with the change. But what we forget is not everybody sees like we do. And I just think that's just humans. I don't think we set out to do that. I think it's just one of those things. And it's always great to say, look, this is what I'm thinking of doing. Do people have ideas of how we can get there? And when people feel involved from the beginning and the process is transparent, of course, you have to make decisions. I mean, you have to make decisions at some point. But involving people and demonstrating the benefits to them makes perfect sense. And yeah, it's just, I know we forget to do it, but it's vitally, crucially important.
I always think that it is. I mean, it's multifaceted, isn't it? And I like what you're saying there about the diversity of thought as well, because it is very easy to think that the differences between people are only very small, or differences maybe between ourselves and them are only very small. But perhaps it's because it's quite complex to think any other way and takes up too much of our time. But
because it pays dividends if you involve people from the beginning, because otherwise you're chasing your tail.
Yeah, I know, absolutely. I've always believed with anything that we're doing or that I've been doing in my personal life and also business life. I try to explain as much as possible why. And I do really think that if people understand why something is happening, it makes it a much easier pill to swallow, doesn't it?
It does. It does. And you allow them to voice. We talk about how people having resistance to change. And it's not necessarily a resistance to change. It's a resistance to letting go what they're familiar with. They'll embrace the change once, people buy into somebody who comes in and sells the magic pill or whatever. We buy into things easily, and we change when we want to change.
Yeah.
That's the thing. We're not going to change when we're told to change.
Yeah, and I suppose that's it. Just trying to get people to understand why something's happening and why it's important to the team, not just important to the company, because I think sometimes that can seem a little bit ethereal. You can't really grasp it, but why it's important to them personally, and the difference that it will make to them in their everyday working. I think that's when a real change can take place.
And you can also ask people to think about that for themselves. So, give me the case why you should hang on to such and such. Argue the case.
Yeah, true.
Involving people. And don't be afraid. People come up with fantastic ideas. This is back to innovation.
Yes.
If you trust people and they know that they have your trust, they will come up with brilliant ideas.
No, I think that's right. Having an open forum where people feel enabled to do that and feel empowered to be able to do that as well. And it's interesting and to make people know that no idea is a daft idea to put forward, because who knows where it might lead. Some of the best ideas out there probably started out as some kind of crazy idea that nobody thought could happen. I'm probably can remember some of the things watching. I'm not a big Star Trek fan, I have to say, but I can remember watching that as a child and thinking, wow, but some of those things are right there in our everyday lives now, aren't they? But technology, I think, is more and more in our lives. Certainly in finance and across end-to-end procure to pay, it's more in evidence now than it ever has been, and will only increase in that area. Do you think that has got a part to play in helping us to build trust? And I suppose I'm thinking there a little bit more around what we were talking about just now, around fraud and helping to create those controls. How much of a role do you think it has to play?
Well, I suppose technology is built by people. So if the people building the technology don't have trust in their team, what happens? That's one thing I always think is like, if you remember the 748s that were, unfortunately, there was accidents with some 748s there a couple of years ago. It emerged afterwards that the engineers building those planes, or whatever you describe them as, realized that there was a fault. And they didn't come forward with it because there was no trust amongst that team and that management and the leadership. And that's the end result. If you think of the post offices here and what was going on with technology. Now, I'm not anti-technology by any means, but I think we also have to remember that there are humans using the technology and there are humans building the technology. And there's a lot of trust involved in all of that being done in the right way. I think technology, when we use it properly, is amazing. And, when we talk about controls and procedures for fraud, you can build so many controls into your systems that will prevent things going wrong. But then you share a password, and what happens?
I think that where it works best, it's where it's with in collaboration with a human. So it's you're augmenting that technology piece, not just it depends. I think it depends on the process, and it depends on the technology that you're using. But I think that one thing from my perspective that you always have to do is look at your existing processes to begin with, so that you know what it is that you are automating, because you can soon find you're chucking out all of those errors, but just doing it a lot faster. But going back to collaboration and that being built on trust, what have you seen in the companies that you're working with, or the people that you've been speaking to recently on your podcast, where that has turned into something like a success story that perhaps you've seen, or person that you've spoken to? What have you found?
So, and I think it's a really interesting organization that I talked to. The guy's name was Luke. I can't remember the name of the organization, but they're, an SEO, search engine optimization company. They're a smallish company, but they have now they don't have any management structures anymore. They're kind of like flat hierarchy. Well, obviously it's not hierarchy anymore, but yeah. And what they did was they kind of said, well, you know what, we need to start trusting people, that actually people can set their own hours, they can set their own locations and do all of that. They have a job to do. As long as that job is getting done, doesn't matter where and when. So if somebody's better off working at 3 a.m, let them have it. However, we still need to get things done that are collective. So they said, okay, who in this team, so there's like 50 employees, so they started small probably. Who in this team is good at handling difficult conversations? Okay, so every time we've got an issue, you'll be the person that helps with that. And who's the person that's good at whatever, selling, whatever. But all of these things, then there's a mentor or a coach to go and help you deal with it. And so they grew quite quickly. That's not small, grew quite quickly. But what happened was their retention rates went up, their profit went up, their sick leave came down. And there was a couple of other things like that as well. So they were seeing the positives in the data. Now, we had a conversation about, well, if you're just hiring like-minded people that can work in this environment, will it backfire at some point? So will you lose diversity by just hiring people like us? And they said they've yet to see. But they were it was a very interesting, he was open to the conversation. And I think it's about trying things to see what might work and having that trust. And then if it doesn't work, saying, okay, let's go back to the drawing board.
I think that's an interesting concept. Maybe it's about having trust in yourself as well, or trust in that concept and letting it run. Interesting story to share, actually, because I think that the best boss that I ever had, going back a few years, was with somebody who had that kind of mindset. And he was good because he didn't have that ego element. He was confident enough to let everybody within the team do what they were best at. And it just so happened that we all were individually good at the areas that the business needed. And perhaps a good leader is about recognizing that as well, and giving people that empowerment to be able to do it.
I had a boss, like the best boss I had, his attitude was, I gave everybody the chance to be successful. I have their back. I trust them to get on with it. And I want you to come to me, if you need whatever. And I think it was a two-way thing. And his ego wasn't in it at all. I could ring him any hour and go, I can't deal with this. What do I do? But I also knew that, we talk about having, seeking permission, afterwards. I always felt like that with him, is I could make up my mind, make a decision, take action. And actually I could go back to him and say, I did this thing. and he's probably going to go, actually, I might have done it like this, but I wasn't there, Susan. I wasn't there. You did the best you could. And it hasn't, it's worked out.
So about having autonomy, isn't it? I think that and being trusted to have that kind of autonomy within the region or the area that you're working. And I think that's really important to people. And I think that probably pays into productivity as well. I mean, do you think that? I mean, how much of a role does trust play in productivity, do you think?
Well, it was going through my head there, was like, wouldn't you just go the extra mile for somebody? When the pressure is on, you will go the extra mile for someone who will thank you, appreciate you afterwards, who will recognize that you went the extra mile, who won't take the credit for it because their ego is out of the question. And if you don't trust somebody, do you really want to do a bit of extra work there on a Friday evening, or would you like to skive off a bit early on a sunny day or whatever, you know? And so I think productivity is going to be impacted by how you're recognized, how much autonomy you have, whether you enjoy doing it, whether it's playing to your strengths, and, you know, all of those kind of normal things that actually in a sports team will be there in spades. So why not have it in and you know, I'm a very big fan of Legacy by James Kerr, and he talks about, you know, the All Blacks and how they became the most successful rugby team in the world. And he has 15 leadership lessons in that. Now 15 is a bit many to remember, but the first one is about sweeping the sheds. And so the New Zealand, the All Blacks won some big rugby tournament, and an hour after all the kind of woohoos and everything were done, the captain of the team and two of the other whatevers, I'm not very good at my rugby terminology, were sweeping the sheds. Because it was their job to sweep the sheds that day. And it didn't matter that they had won the biggest tournament ever. It was their job. And if that didn't happen, it left a bad impression on others. So there's no kind of skipping out on your responsibility. And then that keeps accountability in check. You don't even have to police it because it's that's just the way people work.
Yeah, no, that sounds amazing. I have to read the book. I don't think I've read that one.
It's a very short one.
15 tips. I'm sure I'll be able to follow a few of those, I'm sure. And again, I guess anybody listening to our conversation today, go on to Susan on your LinkedIn page or connect with you afterwards, and I'm sure you can share any of these tips and information that we're talking about today. So what do you think the role of leadership is here with this, and learning how to trust and try and get that collaboration and innovation going within the teams? What can leadership do to sort of help generate that?
So for me, I think it's about appreciating people. That's really, really key. Appreciating individuals' unique contributions.
Yeah.
About allowing for mistakes. I mean, you know, we all make mistakes every day, and accidents even. You know, today I was making coffee and I opened a new packet of coffee and I poured it all into the coffee thing instead of like my other, you know. I was like, oh my God. And I think it's like, I wouldn't have shouted at somebody else, but you know what I mean? It's like, and we make mistakes, you know, we're distracted, we make mistakes, whatever. And I think one of the things that's also underestimated sometimes is actually setting expectations. Setting expectations and saying, you know, how would you like me to work with you? How would you like me to manage you? You know, how would you like me to deal with you? And can you tell me the same, what you expect from me? Because I think often we assume somebody means what they're saying when they don't, or we assume that that's because that's the way we interpret it. So I think setting very clear expectations really key. And honestly, the thing I think that matters not most of all, but I think from my own perspective in the leadership roles I've had, is being able to say, I don't know. There's nothing worse than pretending. You go to somebody and they pretend they have the answers to everything, and they kind of hold them close to their chest because they don't. And by saying I don't know, you're inviting people to give you information as well. And I think there's huge power in saying I don't know. I mean, it's different if you say I don't know how to do a P&L and you're the finance director. I don't mean about, you know, technical stuff, but I mean, we live in a world of uncertainty. An absolute world of uncertainty. We do not know what's coming around the corner. So how can we know everything? So it's okay to say, I don't know.
I think that's a really key and important point to get across, because I think that it's okay if what the leadership are able to show their own vulnerabilities, then I think it makes it okay for other people to share theirs as well. And that's not because we want everybody to be vulnerable all the time, but it means that we can help learn and share from experience, because one thing that a thing that I might not know, somebody else within the team for sure will know the answer. And then, hey presto, a few minutes later, I'll know the answer to that too, and then know how to do it. And I think that that can only help, as you say, generate further conversations, can't it?
Yeah.
And then build on that to create a trusting environment. I suppose that maybe the true testament of any collaboration within a team is what is the results that come out of it. And we've talked about a little bit at the beginning of the conversation about what happens in a team when that trust just isn't there. What kind of signs do you think you can look for if anyone's listening to this and thinking, oh, you know what, I think there's a trust in my team, I think we're collaborative? What should they be looking out for to know that that's really happening?
I think that people will be happy to see each other.
Mm.
There'll just be that sense of, actually, I don't dread going to work. There'll be that sense of, ooh, I'm going to have a chat with Ellen today, see how she's getting on with such and such a thing. Oh, I have a problem. I'm just going to hop over and see if John can help me solve that. Whatever it is, there's that open environment. I feel that if I speak up, if I have something to say, that I'll be listened to. And actually, that's huge, isn't it? Because if you feel like you speak up and it falls on deaf ears all the time, then you're not going to speak up. So if you feel like I speak up, my voice matters, my voice counts, even if it is saying to you, great idea, we don't have the resources to do this right now, can we put it here, whatever. But acknowledging and valuing people's contributions, I think, you'll feel that. And I think there'll be a sense of fun as well, Ellen. I think
Fun, yes.
Yeah, I think there'll be laughter and there'll be fun, and there'll be people who are kind of the butt of certain jokes, but in a nice way, in a way that's actually, and people will want to hang out outside of work. Maybe not all the time, but there'll be that element of, I actually know Ellen as a person, and I like Ellen. I think, it's simple stuff. We're not complicated, really.
No, I know. And I think that we've probably all worked in environments where you have walked into, or hopefully we all have anyway, walked into an office or an environment and felt that atmosphere as soon as we've walked in, of everyone generally feels happy here. Yes, you might be busy, and yes, you've got deadlines and things to be done, but yeah, you have got that fun, and it feels like people have got each other's backs. And I think that that's really key, isn't it?
Somebody will get you lunch or a cup of tea, or they'll collect your photocopying because they've walked 2 floors to get theirs. That kind of stuff. It's just that very nice human way of working.
And I liked what you said there at the end there about that people matter. They feel that they matter. They feel that they're listened to, and they feel that they matter. And I think for everybody listening to this today, I think that you need to question that about yourself in your organization, and as a leader, and as somebody who's involved in forging the culture in your organization. You've got to try and get that across as well. Are the people listened to, and do they feel like that they matter? I think that's really great. And it's been fantastic talking to you, Susan. And I think we could all agree that trust is something that is, matters enormously to a lot of the situations and processes that we talk about. I mean, we spend a lot of time talking about process, talking about technology, for example, but sometimes it is those fundamental aspects of our human nature that underlie all of those things, isn't it?
Just to finish, Ellen, the story keeps coming into my head, but my first cousin was a pilot in the American Air Force. And, I remember him telling me years ago that planes can fly themselves. They do not need pilots. But would you trust going on a transatlantic plane without a pilot?
No, I don't think so.
I wouldn't.
Not yet.
And but they can. And I think that's what it's about. It's about how we feel. We feel that trust, and that's really important to pay attention to. So logically, sure, it can be done, but the feeling is the thing to watch out for. Ellen, it's been brilliant. I've loved this conversation. Thank you.
You too. That's a great place to end. Thanks very much, Susan. Been great to have you here joining us with us for Focus Week. And thanks to everybody for listening. And I hope you'll tune in to us tomorrow as well, where we'll be looking at the future focus. So see you all then. Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Susan. Bye-bye.